Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals, and welcome to this Rockstars 5.0 webinar on Can Traditional Leisure Businesses Crack the Business Travel Segment, sponsored by Flywire and NoiseAware. This is me, Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals and host of today's session. And we're now going to check out this short video from one of our Rockstars series sponsors, NoiseAware, a privacy-safe smart noise monitoring solution for short-term rental property managers and owners. Check this out.
What do property damages, angry neighbors, and sound ordinance violations have in common? They all begin with a noisy guest at your property. That could have been resolved with NoiseAware. Through quick installation and 24-hour monitoring, NoiseAware is an essential tool that monitors noise levels on your property to help protect your profits and peace of mind. NoiseAware. Rest easy.
So in terms of webinar guidelines for today, please keep your sound on mute and your camera off if you're not speaking. I'm being ably assisted by my colleagues Joe, Danny and Floor today. All of the details you can find in the chat as usual. Please do, of course, post any questions you have there as well. And a recording will be sent round to everyone after today's session. And one more short video from our second Rockstar series sponsor. This is global payments enablement and software company Flywire.
Flywire helps travel businesses reduce costs and improve guest experience when collecting payments. Without Flywire, travel payments can be costly and inefficient, requiring the business to work with multiple vendors like payment processors, merchant banks, and more. The process results in difficult manual reconciliation, high fees on both sides of the transaction, and no dedicated support for payers or merchants. We solve these pain points through our Flywire Advantage, the combination of our next-gen payment platform, our proprietary global payment network, and our travel-specific software backed by our deep industry expertise to improve both sides of the payment equation. Guests pay in their local currency and with their preferred payment method, whether it be credit card, local bank transfer, mobile wallets, or other local payment methods. Flywire leverages our significant scale to ensure travel businesses and guests alike enjoy low fees and competitive exchange rates. Businesses receive the exact amount that they bill in the currency of their choice for both domestic and international payments, all reconciled to the penny. If there are any questions along the way, Flywire's around-the-clock multilingual support and dedicated account managers are there to help. To learn more, visit travel.flywire.com and request a demo today.
So let me start by introducing our Rockstars lineup for today, and we're going to turn to Carrie from RESIDE first. Carrie, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Hartman, and I am the Chief Revenue Officer for RESIDE Worldwide. Happy to be with you all today.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Very happy to have you on board for today's session. Next, we have Melania from ALTIDO. Melania, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Melania Tovar, and I'm the Regional Manager for England for ALTIDO. Happy to be here and sharing with you
Thank you very much.
Some information.
Thank you very much, Melania. And Merilee, I can see you've made it to your location as well, so please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Merilee, Karr. I'm CEO and founder of the UnderTheDoormat group and the chairperson for the Short-Term Accommodation Association. And that includes my role and probably we'll be talking a lot about today, trusted stays.
Fantastic. Thank you to all of our fantastic panelists. So to add a little bit of context to today's discussion, we're going to be delving a little bit into how the likes of Airbnb and Sonder have dipped their toes in or expanded into the business travel segment in recent years. You can see two of our stories from short-term rentals in recent years. RESIDE with Carrie has also been expanding its own team in the UK and the EMEA markets in the last 12 months as demand for alternative accommodations in different locations around the world grows. We'll be hearing from Melania about ALTIDO, which in the last few months has been acquired by co-living proptech company Dove Vivo and announced its own acquisitions in the shape of Flatty and A&A Apartments and Boats, growing its own lodging offerings for both leisure and business travellers. And of course, with Merilee, the launch of Trusted Stays, we'll be covering that very, very shortly, what it's bringing to the short-term rental industry, providing access to the global distribution system, and also its partnership with the UK STAA, the UK Short-Term Accommodation Association, and the UK AA, the UK Accommodation Association. So let's kick off today's discussion, and we're going to be looking at how leisure businesses can broaden and target corporate travellers as well, and also how what these sorts of travellers are looking for from their accommodation. So Merilee, I can see you on screen first, so I'll turn to you. We've already covered a little bit about what Trusted Stays is in that introduction. I'd like to hear a little bit more from you exactly what that offering is, because during the pandemic, we know that you started out offering NHS and key government workers this discounted, safe and clean accommodation spaces. So how has this developed into Trusted Stays?
Yeah, so I mean, look, it was wonderful that so many companies, and there were 30 companies that came together. It included ALTIDO, who's on the call today, but the likes of Sykes Cottages, One Fine Stay. I mean, 30 companies from across the UK donating stays for free to NHS workers during the pandemic. But of course, you know, we're all commercial businesses. It was never going to be sustainable for us to give that for free on a long-term basis. But we also encountered many NHS workers coming to us and saying, well, we want to stay in your accommodation because the NHS is putting us up in the Holiday Inn, and that doesn't suit our needs. And so at the same time, of course, we were in discussions with government about how to support the sector. And we said, look, we would much rather operate commercially than be taking handouts from government. So why will you not purchase from our industry? And there was a misunderstanding of our industry. I think a lot of people in government saw our industry as only peer-to-peer. And of course, peer-to-peer is an important part of our industry, but there are a lot of professional companies and operators in our sector. And so, especially once they learned that the likes of One Fine Stay are owned by Accor Hotels, that Marriott Homes and Villas have entered the market, it was for them a big wake-up call to the fact that our sector was actually professional and had clear standards. But the second thing they said to us is, you know, we can buy from you if you can clearly have those standards through accreditation and those sorts of things. But the second thing that we need is that you bring everything under one umbrella, because we're not going to go and contract with lots of different companies. And so having worked together as an industry during the pandemic for a charitable initiative, we said, well, why can't we actually work together as an industry in the longer term for the commercial benefit of everyone who wants to be a part of it? And that's really how Trusted Stays was born.
And we've explored again a little bit about how with Trusted Stays, you're looking to help the whole short-term rental industry across business travel. How would you say the launch of Trusted Stays has been able to actually keep up with consumer demands and whether it's business travellers, whether it's leisure travellers, what they're actually looking for in their types of accommodation?
Yeah, I mean, so just to be clear, Trusted Stays is a platform exclusively for corporate and business travelers. That includes government. So we, as an industry, won the first ever government RFP for our sector when we won that government transient stays RFP last year. So what that means is that any government department, so that could be an MP who's looking for a place to stay when they're traveling to be in Parliament, or it could be an NHS worker or any civil servant across government can actually purchase stays. And when we won that government RFP, it also gave us permission, so to speak, to build into what's called the global distribution system, which you mentioned earlier. And that had been another blocker. In fairness, even back then, when we headed down this route, Sonder hadn't actually got into the GDS. So literally no one was in the GDS. Marriott didn't know how to do it. One Fine Stay and Accor couldn't. You know, it wasn't on anyone's roadmap, but it was, of course, this walled garden that hotels enjoyed. And with the changes that came about with COVID, obviously you've got, so many companies, whether that's consultancies, banks, anyone who might have still needed to travel was looking for different types of accommodation. And so with winning the government RFP, we then were able to agree a contract to build our industry into the global distribution system for the very first time as well. And that was really important because in order to access all of the RFPs and to access that kind of global distribution system demand, we actually have to put our product in that system. And I'll be really honest, if anyone who's seen inside that system a little bit, it does feel like it's from the 1980s. So it is not what you expect from an OT. But it is, of course, a very powerful system, and lots of people have kind of predicted its demise over the years. And, pretty soon the GDS will no longer exist. But I think its endurance shows how tightly they've captured that market. And so for me, it was about how do we make sure our sector gets access to it? And how do we make sure that business, that companies and, governments and all these people who work off that system have access to our product, which is increasingly in demand from those types of travelers.
Thank you very much, Merilee. Although I can't promise to say anything, I would know much about what it would have looked like in the 1980s, but thank you very much for that. And Melania, I mean, we've already talked about with Merilee how ALTIDO has been part of this NHS initiative as well. I have to admit, I think the ALTIDO business is fascinating. It's great that we can have you on this panel as well today. This merger of B&B Buddy, London Residents Club, Hintown, Rent Experience back in 2019 as well. So I believe you've got a bit of data about what you're seeing in the short-term rental market and why you're seeing these travellers shift towards your particular accommodation services.
Yes, absolutely. Like now, like in the business since COVID, of course, things changed a lot for us. Like Merilee said, we have a big opportunity to, target other markets that in the past we didn't have. And I will talk more about that in the next questions. But then, yeah, we have very interesting data about 2020 and how the spend habits of the consumers are changing towards the short-term rental. And then we know that at least like for every $4 or dollars that people spend in accommodation, one of these dollars is going to the short-term rental business, which is huge and is the trend. And we see this growing and growing even more and getting like a bigger slice of the cake now. So in terms of what is changing, we can say the amenities, in terms of amenities, what we can offer with our homes. And people want more space for sure. They want to have like a good capacity from like Wi-Fi, not maybe like when you're in a hotel or like a space like that you are sharing. The Wi-Fi can be slow and then you cannot do or work remotely. So you have more like a certainty that you have a place that the Wi-Fi is going to work for you. And also it's about location. People are more open to explore new locations. It's not like in the past, like the traditional locations where hotels are in the urban cities and the urban places, but also new neighborhoods, especially here in London, that people want to explore. Now with social media and blogs and all this information, people want to try different locations. And it's about to know these micro communities, the neighborhoods. And when you open spaces like we do with Dove Vivo, like the co-working spaces and the co-living spaces in places like in Madrid, in Chueca, where people have, spaces to do events, corporate events, or just to have fun, or just to work. This is the trend, and this is what they are looking for: more space, more amenities, but also spaces that they can relate to other people, like-minded people like them. So yeah, we are like looking at this and working really hard to bring more of this model into our business.
That's excellent, Melania. And I know you as well. You've created some case studies both with ALTIDO and with Dove Vivo as well. So whether it's corporate travelers, whether it's those who are being relocated as well. How are you noticing maybe the attitudes of business travelers changing, if at all, towards short-term rentals? Is it with these types of amenities, this space, Wi-Fi, are they taking more awareness of this segment?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we feel like still it's a matter of like, it's the traditional way, like Merilee was saying, and it's through these traditional channels and the GDS, and to reach those targets like the corporate, and that is not going to change, because corporate market, they want someone or a company that they trust, and that they have certain standards, and that, you know, like kind of service apartments that they know that they can deliver. So they are not going to rely on OTAs such as Airbnb or Booking just to book corporate stay. So we see it like we need to work more, and we are doing that with growing our team to work with corporate and these kind of partnerships that we are doing with Trust Estate. That is fantastic, because now we can reach in an easier way the market. But then again, yeah, it can change a little bit, but I think that they want more things, but it's still the corporate segment wanted, you know, rely on the traditional ways to get that inventory.
Fantastic, thank you. I've seen a comment from Mark Harris in the chat as well. I couldn't remember if this was you, Melania, or Merilee, but it was just a comment about, could the statistic, RE, the percentage of every dollar spent on travel going into short-term rentals be repeated, please? I can't remember. Was that you, Melania?
Yeah. For every $4 that people spend in accommodation, $1 goes to the short-term rental business. That is data from the 2020. So like I say, we are seeing that this is going to grow more for our business.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think one other stat that's actually quite interesting, Skift did a small piece on business travel and also the GDS. They reckon that the overall market is about 156 billion. And you know, that's huge. They think that we can only capture 5% of that market as short-term rentals. I think that they're wrong, considering where we've come across overall accommodation, as the numbers Melania just spoke about show. Once people stay in a short-term rental, they often prefer a short-term rental. Goldman Sachs has done research about that. And so I think now that more and more people are experiencing us, especially in a post-COVID world, they're looking for a different experience also when they travel for business. And imagine if we could just capture 10% of that market or 20% of that market, we're talking significant billions added to what is already a fast growing market. And that's really exciting.
That's an excellent point, Merilee. And I actually had a quote, I think it might even be from Skift later on. So we will come back to that point as well. Thank you for that. Carrie as well, with RESIDE as well, you slightly differently to what our other panelists are doing, you're providing these professionally operated and managed global alternative accommodations. We've talked a little bit about your growth already in UK and EMEA. From what you've heard as well from our other panelists, what do you think guests are looking for in their accommodation? How is this being driven as well by the new wave of consumer demand?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really kind of put it into two buckets: what is never changing and what is ever changing, right? So when we think about housing, whether it be traditional short-term rentals or this corporate housing space that we've existed in for almost 40 years in the United States, the never changing is people are always looking for safety. Am I being placed somewhere that is safe? Can I trust the area? Is it clean? Can I go in? Is it safe? Is it clean? And is it comfortable? Is my shower hot? Is my Wi-Fi fast? Is my bed a place where I can lay my head and get a good night's sleep so that I can wake up tomorrow focused on why my employer moved me from point A to point B, right? That's sort of the never changing mandate, right? So, whether you're doing housing in 1950 or you're doing housing today, those are kind of the cornerstones of success. What I consider, ever changing, and I think both Melania and Merilee touched on this, is just sort of, I would say, the digitization of our industry, right? In our own personal lives, we have become accustomed to easy ways to get from point A to point B. And so there's been a really big push to take this extended stay travel, corporate travel, which typically a little more archaic. It's been around for several decades, usually a lot of handoffs between companies that partner together. And how do you make that on demand, a great digital experience, and give sort of the same ease of use that has historically only existed around hotels. So partnering, through the GDS, partnering through OTAs, it's a lot of the reason why we have the platform that we have as we've evolved with those clients that we've served for so long. So it's beyond a hotel, and it's that digital experience, and then also still being able to deliver safety and security to people in a digitized fashion. So like a quick example of that I can give, I'd say duty of care is probably the number one concern, assuming the cornerstones of safe, clean, and comfortable are always there. I would say the number one, thing that has come before COVID, but especially during COVID, is, how can companies like ours give assurances around the safety, security, proper vetting, and appropriate duty of care as it pertains to the people and the companies that we partner with who are ultimately delivering those short and long-term options to our guests. And so, we've done, just specifically to give a very specific example, we've done 4 key partnerships over the last 5 years. And what that does is it hits the cornerstones of, we do digitized sweeps every 10 days to look for financial security, any sort of thing that could flag across Dow Jones, Dun & Bradstreet, Factiva, OFAC compliance, any of these things, in order to be in our supply chain network, you have to pass that type of rigor every 10 days. We have to be able to give predictive analytics to our guests, to our clients, to show, we're not waiting for them to tell us where they're going to travel next. We have enough predictive analytics that we should know where the market compression exists. We should know where the travel demand is increasing up, and we're offering proactive solutions through our data analytics tool. Going back to safety, especially out of COVID, any person that moves with us receives not only neighborhood walking safety scores, but they receive on-demand COVID notifications, especially during COVID when lockdowns were happening in various places. We were able to remove the need for our corporate clients to have to manage that themselves. We needed to move people or change locations that they needed to go to. So there's, I would say that need for immediate sort of permanent data analytics running in the background so that you can always show up as the leader of not just the clean, comfortable, and safe, but safety looks very different today than it even looked 2 years ago. So being able to give that to people without them asking for it is a huge thing people are asking for.
And it seems quite ironic that we're talking about the ease of getting from point A to B when we were talking about our off screen about our different troubles on flights this week as well. But is there anywhere that you're particularly seeing most demand for these professionally managed alternative accommodations anywhere in the world right now?
Yeah, I'd say in EMEA specifically, and I'm sure everyone would agree, the market compression, especially this summer, now that travel's turned back on full board, is primarily happening in Dublin. It's happening in London. And, I would say there's also a secondary, just because of some of the unexpected travel demand as a result of what's happening in the Ukraine. We've seen a lot of market compression within Poland, Romania, as a lot of companies have done evacuation and emergency measures to move family members out of the Ukraine. So there's been sort of the secondary spike that's happened there. I would say Dublin is probably the most compressed, with London running a very close second and Berlin showing up in third. So I don't know if anyone's seeing anything different, but that's the analysis we've done. That's sort of where that friction point of, travel demand has been pent up for about a year and a half. And then there's the normal seasonality that comes with summer moves.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Merilee, Carrie there's talked about safe, clean, and comfortable. I think those are the biggest takeaways I can take from what you just said. But how are you ensuring trust and safety? I believe you've got your own accreditation as well with the Quality in Tourism. How has that helped to build your reputation?
Yeah, well, look, I think, we actually partnered with Quality in Tourism at an industry level a couple of years back. So actually already back in 2018, because one of the things that we could recognize at an industry level was that both consumers, government, there's a pressure to recognize that our industry does have standards. I think my biggest frustration is when I speak to, MPs or others, and they say, oh, your industry doesn't have standards. And that perception, I think, is something that we've got to break as an industry. And accreditation is an incredibly powerful way to do that, because by operators who are meeting those standards, in many cases already, actually getting accredited, what it means is that we can all say, look, there is a badge that we all carry that demonstrates that these standards, A, exist, but B, that we can demonstrate by an independent third party that somebody's checked that they're really in place. And, I think especially, in the UK, but, with regulations coming from all over the place around the world, I think as an industry, it's a huge opportunity for us to get ahead of that game. But then when it comes to business travel, it's a table stake. The duty of care that Carrie spoke about is really important. The Quality in Tourism accreditation we do is safe, clean, and legal. Any operator who wants to be a part of Trusted Stays needs to be accredited. We do accept other accreditations. I mean, this isn't about just choosing our favorite. It's about just making sure that the right standards are in place so that when any organization, whether that's a relocation agent or a corporate, books on Trusted Stays, that they know that those minimum standards are always going to be in place, no matter which operator it is that happens to be delivering a particular booking. And I think that's really important because, you've talked about the likes of Airbnb and others trying to enter the business travel segment. And I think one of the challenges that platforms have sometimes had is that, by their very nature, they don't want to guarantee standards, because if they guarantee standards, then they've also got a whole liability challenge. So platforms are not really set up to do that. And I think sometimes when we misunderstand the role of a platform, then we think, oh, well, they need to get all this stuff right. Well, no, actually, it might not be the platforms that can play that role. And so that's where I think there is a role for associations. There is a role for these kinds of accreditations. And then for those high quality operators to distinguish themselves from the others by being the ones to get accredited, and therefore also gain access to some of these new markets as a result of showing that you're meeting those standards.
And exactly what you say there. I think we've seen on short-term rentals, and indeed we've been covering a lot of these stories, but you see in Ireland, in Wales, Australia, there's a lot of big regulation stories and talks about bans as well. And it'd be interesting to see what the sort of attitude towards short-term rentals, how that is changing or developing as a result of that. But the trial that you're doing on the GDS with these partner companies, how do you believe then by sort of providing a new channel for professional or corporate travel bookers, how do you think this can actually revolutionize the short-term rental sector that we know?
I mean, look, I think in its simplest form, the more people who experience our sector, and one of the reasons I was very excited to win the government RFP is that if we can get MPs and regulators, policymakers actually experiencing our sector and understanding that we have those standards, the type of quality and variety of accommodation that they can get for all different types of trips, that is going to help when it comes to them trying to put bans on our industry and things like that. At the end, regulation is coming. I don't think that's a wave that we're going to stop completely. However, there is a balance. And if we can get the right types of regulation, in places like Portugal, where they have simple registration schemes, to make the activity visible, those types of things, then that's okay, because I think doing it in the open, transparently, etc., I think most people don't have an issue with that. Where it becomes problematic is where you start to get bans and people saying, well, we want to stop the growth in the sector, or, we want to prevent people from being able to rent out their property, all those kinds of things, because then actually what we end up with is less opportunity to grow the market. So I often talk in my style role about the responsible growth of the industry. And that's why I think there's a role for things like accreditation. There's a role for professional operators, so that actually we can better demonstrate the standards that do exist in our sector, and combat, some of the negative press that, people hear about of, that disaster here or there. And I think the more that we're able to do that and work together as an industry to get those positive stories across, the better chance we have for balanced regulation to be the end result. And of course, for all of us, that's in our interest, because if we get the wrong type of regulation, it's going to impact every single one of our businesses.
And you cite Portugal there, and that's of course one of the countries that ALTIDO operates in. So, Melania, we've heard a little bit from my own research as well of when ALTIDO was formed and your merger as well, and they've talked about this definitive branded, curated experience and providing these hotel-like services, particularly as the blurring occurs between these asset classes. So what do you think has been key to providing your own curated guest experience at ALTIDO?
Yes, yeah. I think the local knowledge, that is our forte, and then our teams on the ground. We work really hard to have like a good team of people on the ground, that they get like the expertise of everything that is happening in every location that we have in our regions. So sometimes, in Portugal, it's kind of different because we have different models by region. So in Portugal, for example, we have self check-ins and self checkout. It's very different from the London market. People here expect greeters and people to talk to them and do a tour of the houses and then to share with them knowledge. But then again, they have that in Portugal as well, because our local team can chat with them and have all the guest experience side of the business. So what we are investing with our team is just about knowledge, and like I say, about these micro communities and what is happening in outside these locations or these buildings or these houses. What are the best restaurants? What are the best spots to go and work remotely if we can provide these spaces or stuff like that? So yeah, definitely it's all about the ground teams and the local knowledge.
And also that personal element as well seems quite keen, quite a big factor as well within that experience.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And Carrie as well, because we refer to your subsidiary marketplace, which is RESIDE 360. Hopefully you can talk a little bit more about that as well. Thank you, Melania, for that as well. And Carrie, I think it was interesting that, from the research, it seems that there's it's about combining technology and human interaction to curate the best housing options for your clients and maximizing their choice. So could you just talk us a little bit more about what the purpose of RESIDE 360 is for guests?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about something that I want to touch on real quick that Merilee said, that really, which is, I think, I second her sentiment that we are always going to be pushing against perceptions of sort of the name brands that are out there in our space. So Airbnb for sure, if I had $1 for every time I've had to have a conversation about the difference, between us and them. And I think the key is, one of the perception struggles they have on their end is that's a shared economy, right? Where, I could go tomorrow and participate in an Airbnb or a VRBO. Whereas, what we're really talking about is a controlled economy, right? So utilizing the platform as a vehicle to bring ease of use to corporate clients that need to have a particular set of rigor, duty of care, right? It's how do we take, as Melania said, people who, once they stay in a corporate apartment or a short-term rental, they prefer that to a hotel. They like to have a kitchen. They don't necessarily want to eat out 3 days a week. They love the space. They love to have a balcony to drink their coffee in the morning. So because, but how do we provide that with that sort of digitized experience that, quite frankly, we've all become accustomed to without losing the personal touch? So yes, to what you're saying, with our platform, with our customer app, we still have a full team, within APAC, EMEA, and the United States, because the reality is, people have needs and people still want the human interaction. Our teams are available 24/7. Somebody has a question at 2 a.m. There is always a person they can reach. We don't believe in sending bot responses to anyone, unless maybe it's on the, the sales qualification side that, that's lovely to kind of qualify, disqualify. But if there's somebody out there that has a need, we have an obligation to be there for them. And at the end of the day, as much as we want certain things to be easy, right? I should be able to look at RESIDE's options. I should be able to access all of my suppliers at 1 a.m., 2 p.m., 7:30 on a Saturday as I'm binge watching Netflix. However, the move is a personal move. A lot of these changes are very big for people. They're going across the country or internationally to start a new job, and change is hard. Even when it's exciting, it's hard. And having the peace of mind that the easy stuff, I kind of look at it like our platform takes the non-essential things, gets them out of the way so that our people have the capacity to still give that personalized experience to every single person that's moving. So with that said, what are the things that they can do, right? Using our Verdi app, if we are partnered with another growing change, which is keyless access, right? A lot of people want to have a hotel check-in experience in corporate apartments. So with our corporate providers that have that capability, we have Verdi kiosks. What does that mean? I can do all of my ID verification on my phone. I don't have to, I should be able to go there, do a two-factor authentication and have a key that pops out, just like a hotel key. And I can use that to access my apartment. I'm not fumbling with keys, with fobs, and I'm not sure, which keys for the elevator, which ones for the parking. Now, again, that requires certain suppliers have that sophistication, but we can help support that type of technology change for them if it's available. As I mentioned before, if I get into my apartment, let's say there is something that is not hitting the clean, safe, or comfortable, right? I can hit a button. I don't have to look for an email to call or pull up a previous notification. I can simply hit a button and reach anybody any time of day. Sometimes it's easier to show me the problem than tell me about the problem, right? You've got to be willing to meet people from a customer experience perspective. You got to be willing to meet them in the communication fashion that they prefer. So those would be the elements that our technology is aimed to do, which is, if you want that digitized experience as part of your stay, we're going to give you as much of that as we can. But if there's an element where you need consult, you have a question, or you simply just want to see a friendly face at 2 a.m., we want to give that to you as well. Kind of taking the best of both worlds and blending them together. Because with, the human touch is never going to go away. It's the cornerstone of what we do. I don't ever see it leaving. It just will continue to evolve as, people give us feedback. And I would say one thing that's been really enlightening for us, we've had the privilege as we've developed 360, which is our digitized marketplace, our app as well. We've had the privilege of 3 of the Fortune 10 being our beta testers for the last 3 years. So we get a lot of feedback from people that have big moves and complicated moves and 30 different types of moves. And, what they like is the ability to take all those various SLAs based on those different types of client profiles, putting them into a platform. And as both Merilee and Melania had alluded to, I don't have to have 50 contracts with 50 separate companies. I can load all my preferred suppliers can sit in one place, and all I have to do is push a button to get things to move forward. And that's the evolution piece of our industry that's really important to our corporate partners. out in the space, right? It's, again, how do we take that ease of use and transpose it over to our industry without losing that duty of care and compliance that's so important.
That's great. Thank you very much, Carrie. And that actually transitions perfectly into the next point as well, because we're looking at how businesses are integrating traditional or shared mid-long-term solutions well with short-term solutions. So Melania, I think you're probably well versed with this subject as well, talking about your acquisition by Dove Vivo, and in the company's own words, becoming Europe's largest living operating company as well. I think it's 2,500 properties and apartments in 40 cities and 6 different countries. So I guess, how do you envisage the future of short-term rentals or short-term accommodation alongside mid and long-term accommodation in a wider market sense?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. As you probably know, we got this acquisition in place at the beginning of the year, being like an interesting learning experience for both companies, because yeah, it changed them from my personal experience in other like jobs or in other companies. And I don't know, like 8 years ago was very different to think that big hotel groups can invest in different companies, or like a startup like us, or any short-term rental company. And it happened with Karr. I had that experience from before in other companies, and Hyatt and any other big brands. And now we see other big players in the industry, in the real estate market, doing the same. And this is the case of Dove Vivo, that they saw a great opportunity in a company like ALTIDO to invest and to see that we can complement each other, actually. That we have a business that they don't know anything about it, that is the short-term rental, and then they know really well what they know with asset, like big asset and co-living spaces, co-working spaces, student accommodations. So now we're integrating both. And like I say, it's a learning experience so far. It's going really well because it complements in the sense that, yeah, we have the short term and it's a leisure market and it's not going anywhere and it's going to grow more. But then how can we utilize these other assets as the student accommodations, for example? We have these massive buildings that the students are, let's say, almost all year round. But we have a portion of the year that is the summer that they just go. And then you have this empty asset or building sitting there. And what we do is like we create these spaces, like, or we build these pop-up hotels, and we operate those rooms as a hotel to generate more revenue and to, utilize in a better way those assets. So it's a very interesting experiment, let's say, and a new model that Dove Vivo and ALTIDO is doing, and is working great. And I think that we are growing even more and more this year with that. And we are opening, well, we already opened some of them in Madrid, in Troika, central locations in main cities in Europe, in other, outside London, like pop-up hotels, like in Dublin, like Carrie was telling, like a huge demand in Dublin. I'm glad that I hear that, because yeah, it's happening. And then in places like York and Oxfordshire and any other locations around or outside London. So yeah, it's been like a great experience with this.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Melania. And we turn to Merilee as well, because I think it was you. It might have been in Skift that you were saying about how the investment in the leisure industry has enabled the growing maturity really of the short-term rental industry. And now we're seeing that, as we've already seen with what Carrie and Melania are saying, they're breaking more into the residential property world. And I know with Trusted Stays as well, and your partnership with the UK AA that we mentioned earlier, how you're adding your build to rent proposition as well. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how that's providing a greater selection of properties for these types of travellers?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it was an interesting one how we ended up working together with the UK Apartment Association. Of course, as two associations, we've always been in contact and, shared best practices and worked together on policy things. But when we came out of COVID and we were explaining what we'd done with Trusted Stays, the CEO, Dave Butler, said, oh, wow, well, we've been trying to crack the corporate market for the UKA and our build to rent world for a really long time. So rather than us continuing to try and crack it and hitting some brick walls, why don't we actually work together? And so that's how Trusted Stays became a joint initiative between both UKA and STAR. Now, I think what's really interesting is build to rent, multifamily in North America, depending on where you come from, is a market that is waking up to this whole flexible rentals piece. And you see that because, everything from the digital nomad and people wanting that ability to live more flexibly, through to business travelers actually wanting to come and stay in different type of accommodation when they travel. So you end up with this whole mix of demand, which doesn't have necessarily a clear home. Now, we see with Trusted Stays, for example, we'll get corporates that will say, well, I need 10 apartments for 3 months in the autumn in this location. And as many of us will know, in the short-term rental market, you might not have 10 properties in a single building or in a close enough geography to kind of meet that demand. Whereas, build to rent multifamily, that is the structure that they work in. So, that ability to meet those kinds of demands is really clear. But what's also really exciting, or I would even say the most exciting part about that partnership, is that the UK and its members recognize that what we do in the short-term rental market, the whole hospitality side of things, the operational management, even our systems. So, the kind of PMSs and, all that stuff that our industry has created is something that it doesn't really make sense for them to go and try and replicate. So it's much better for UK Apartment Association members, the build to rent sector, multifamily and other places, to actually partner with companies in our sector. Now, obviously, ALTIDO is an example where they actually went and acquired them. So, mergers and all these things are likely to happen too. But that convergence between property, hospitality, and short-term rentals is happening. I mean, Skift had a whole conference on it back in early May. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Because the institutional real estate owners want to capture some of the value that our sector can give them access to, but they need the expertise from our industry to be able to do that, whether that is things like Trusted Stays and access to the GDS market, whether that is, the technology to give them multi-platform and to operate. And in some cases, they also need an operator because their teams are maybe not set up to do it. In London, 2 examples, we work with Canary Wharf Group, who operate together with UnderTheDoormat, use Hosperia technology and are in Trusted Stays. And on the other hand, you've got Way of Life, which is owned by Long Harbour, where they chose to operate and they just chose a tech partner to help them get access to Trusted Stays. So you have all these different models, but in every case, they're needing to partner with people in our industry to access these markets. And so I think that for both of our sectors, it's an opportunity for growth and new revenue streams.
Thank you very much, Merilee. And Carrie, a similar question to you as well, because again, you're providing access to a lot of these vetted alternative accommodations. So how are you combining these traditional shared mid, long-term and short-term solutions all in one? You're talking about corporate housing, hotels, short-term rentals. That's quite a broad mix of asset classes there.
Yes, our supply chain team is very busy on any given I would say, going back to sort of the traditional partnerships that we've had, one of the main accreditations that we sort of anchored our initial work when we started to build out 360 in 2017 was the Corporate Housing Providers Association, right? Or CHIPA, which is the acronym it's known for. So a lot of these long-standing organizations that want sort of that what's considered the gold standard accreditation as it's pertaining to corporate clients is usually where we would find our original base, right? That's sort of that traditional supplier that served this industry. Of course, always partnering with hotels, apart hotels, people involved with the service departments, associations within the UK and the outer parts of EMEA. And then one of kind of going back to that shared economy, one of these just beautiful golden windfalls that has happened for our industry. Like some what do I always say, hope is not a strategy, but and luck, but it's awesome when it comes your way. But one of the really awesome learnings from the VRBOs and Airbnbs is that they've really cut their teeth quite successfully in the shared economy. One of the downsides, one of the upsides of that is you end up with this new swath of people who, maybe I had one rental home in Dublin and it's booked so well that fast forward 5 years, now I own 25 properties. Or I might be a property management company that is only focused on unfurnished short-term rentals in the past, or it might be a real estate company that focuses, is using the Airbnbs and the VRBOs of the world to sort of backfill these very short transient stays. One of the really nice things that's happened to help diversify our supply chain is if you think about it, you can go to someone who has proven themselves, they become financially viable, they meet all those core standards for our duty of care, but they've worked out the kinks within the shared economy, and you can go to them and say, do you want the weekend house party? The girls' trip for 3 days, or would you like 90 days with a corporate traveler who's part of a blue chip company? And it's a really easy conversation. Of course, they have to go through the vetting and the qualifications and everything like that, and get the proper sign-offs. But it's been a really interesting dynamic shift for us because it's expanded the available options that we have. At the same time, it's done an interesting thing for sort of, I think, bumping up against a historic barrier that we've had, which is like the perceived cost of corporate housing versus if I were to go get something on an Airbnb or a VRBO. So there's a lot of really just interesting and dynamic changes that are happening as a result, but we're really looking in all the different places, right? As long as people can meet the stringency of the duty of care parameters that we have to give our corporate clients, no option is off the table, which is just, it's just opened up the world quite literally to both ourselves and to our clients that we serve, which is just, to say it's been fun is an understatement, but the only thing I can think of this early.
Thank you, Carrie. And looking ahead as well as we look towards the future of business and leisure travel, I'll come to Melania first, because from the outside looking, it looks like a very exciting time for ALTIDO. You've, as I say, branched now into more sort of leisure destinations. I think it would be fair to say these acquisitions, as Merilee touched on, Flatty, AA apartments and boats as well, so all types of lodging. Is this kind of a strategic move? Is this something that you're going to go into more? Is this something that you expect to happen more in the industry generally?
Absolutely, yes. Of course, with the growth that we are experiencing now with Vivo in our back supporting us, we have big plans for expansion. And of course, we have one of our biggest collections is the coast and country. And that means every leisure destination that is not urban, meaning London or Edinburgh. But for example, in Portugal, we have Cascade, we have Sintra, that we have amazing villas. In outside of Edinburgh, we have estates. Here in London or outside London, we have amazing inventory in Aussie Island, in York, Oxfordshire, Plymouth, Cornwall. So yeah, we are acquiring even more and more like this collection, working on that. And definitely this is something that we are looking forward, and not only here in our main regions, meaning Italy, Portugal, Scotland and England, but also in other countries such as Spain and France, which we already have some minor inventory there. as a coastal country, but the plan is just to expand even more there. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Melania. And I guess there's so much happening at the moment within travel. We talk about the blurring, we talk about weakening consumer power, and perhaps fewer people are going to be looking to travel internationally this year, particularly with the cost of living. We talk about increasing travel costs, even problems at the airport, which some of us have experienced just in the last 24 hours. Merilee, what are your predictions for the future of business, leisure travel?
Oh, if only I had a crystal ball.
And more time as well.
I think, there's two major forces that are at play almost in parallel. One is, this kind of revenge travel. Everyone's come out of COVID. They've been locked up for a couple of years, and really wanting to get out, to visit friends and family, to try new destinations, to explore the world again. And I think that's a pretty strong drive. You see that in, the ADRs, the occupancy levels that we're all experiencing. And, if you look at North America, where actually the kind of lockdowns never came back in the same way that we experienced them in Europe, and that's been an ongoing trend, which hasn't slowed down. So I think that is in some ways the stronger of the trends. Now, let's also not forget that we have inflation, we have all these kind of cost pressures and those sorts of things. I think at the moment, what we're seeing is that often the increased ADRs and occupancy that we're driving more than outweighs the increase in costs, particularly because in our industry, what you can see is that, compared to hotels, we tend to be more cost effective. There are less touch points, less labor intensive, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if we look at, hotels as a segment compared to ours, we bode pretty well when it comes to that cost control. And so I think overall that's really positive. I think what we are going to see, and probably sooner, we'll see it hitting in let's say the more cost-effective end of the market. If you are a family that does, one package trip holiday to Spain each year, those are the ones that are maybe first going to have to cut back. Because they're those will tend to be the consumers where energy price rises are hitting harder, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly at the luxury end of the market, people have been saving money over these past few years, all these kinds of things. And so I don't think we're going to see that hitting in the short term. That isn't to say that it won't have an impact in the longer term. But we also have now, hopefully, the return of business travel, and those numbers. I think latest I saw was that it's hitting about 80% of what it was pre-pandemic. So that's still a ways to go. The challenge with all these things is there isn't one single factor. There's several things that are all playing a role. But I think overall, our industry's in a very strong position. I think the new consumers who've experienced our sector over the past couple of years is something which bodes well for consumers continuing to choose to stay in a short-term rental over the next couple of years ahead. And whether that's a staycation or an international trip or a business trip, I think overall we're in a strong position. As long as, of course, the world doesn't end up in World War III and other things that none of us can predict.
Thank you, Merilee. And well, the hour has absolutely flown by, but I want to give a big thank you to all of our contributors, to Carrie, to Melania, and to Merilee. We have plenty more questions that we could have got through, but unfortunately, we've just slightly run out of time. But before we finish, I've just got a couple of slides to run through quickly. So mark your diaries for our Urban Living Festival on the 6th and 7th of July at East Winter Garden, Canary Wharf, when we'll be delving even more into this blurring between hospitality and real estate asset classes, as we've been talking about with our three panelists today. I'm going to be bringing together CEOs, high quality speakers and attendees, which includes Amanda Couples. There you can see the General Manager UK and Northern Europe at Airbnb. Very much looking forward to talking to her. and discussing, as we again mentioned on this webinar, about how flexible living is shaping the future of urban accommodation. And we can also exclusively announce a 20% discount code, which you can find in the chat now. I think that is ULF, all capitals, 2022 STRZ, and we'll keep the discussion open a little bit longer so you can take note of that. For sponsorship opportunities, please do contact my colleague Katie. Her details are on screen now. And then back to the previous slide. We're back in 4 weeks' time on Tuesday, the 19th of July for our next Rockstars webinar, which is called Reducing Pain Points for Property Managers. Some of our panelists today might be interested in that. Hope you can join us then by signing up for this no-cost session in the chat or on the QR code on the screen now. So a big thank you again to our sponsors, to Flywire and NoiseAware, for sponsoring our Rockstar series and session. As I mentioned, we're going to keep the session open for just another 2 minutes so that any of our attendees can take notes from what we've done. I saw a question in the Q&A, Merilee, I think you've answered, and if Carrie and Melania want to also do that, then you're welcome to. So feel free to contact us via our various channels. All that's left for me to say is thank you again to listening, to all of our panelists. Thank you for participating, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much, everyone.